A very warm welcome to the virtual summit on ESG Landscape, future-proofing Indian businesses. On behalf of SABIC and ET Energy World, I thank all our esteemed speakers today, as well as our viewers joining in from multiple locations. In recent years, interest on ESG has surged globally. Companies across the world are being evaluated by investors and other stakeholders, not only by their financial performance, but with non-financial contribution that is now growingly being measured through ESG. As we know, positive ESG impact enables value creation, risk management, regulatory readiness, investor transparency, long-term survivability, and more. This has made it important for companies to develop ESG maturity in order to strengthen collaboration with stakeholders and other key partners. Today's discussion will focus on the Indian ESG landscape underlining climate neutrality, governance, socio-economic impact, and role of human capital, sustainable solutions, and future of sustainability funding. The hashtag for this event is Championing India, and we would like our viewers today to share your key takeaways from this event on social media platforms using the hashtag Championing India. Let more people gain access to the insights and content shared by our eminent speakers from the industry. On that note, let's begin the virtual summit with an opening address by Mr. Iyad Al-Garawi, General Secretary of Board and Investor Relations Officer, SABIC. Welcome, Mr. Iyad.
Thanks for hosting me today, and I hope that you have an enjoyable, productive, and beneficial gathering talking about a very important subject, ESG. I am Iyad Al-Garawi. I am the General Secretary of SABIC's Board and the Investor Relations Officer. And I'm really glad to be part and addressing this important gathering today. I really appreciate our colleagues in SABIC, in India, and in Asia at large. In recent years, interest of ESG has grown quite rapidly. ESG as a term has grown to become the forefront when talking about the non-financials disclosures. So the environment, social, and governance has become in the forefront in people's minds, particularly investors. ESG represent how the companies value the non-financials in the way that it creates a strategy, performance business, and treats the whole ecosystem around it. So you see that there's growing interest from a lot of stakeholders, including obviously NGOs and investors, in understanding what companies and organizations are doing in ESG front. In the financials side, it's very clear. You have IFRS and you have other financial matrices and frameworks that are globally being adapted. However, non-financial disclosures is still growing and is still being adapted, and there is no global standard. So consistency is still a challenge for organization. We look at this as an opportunity, and we can see that in today's world, there is no global framework that contains all the non-financial disclosures yet. We can look at this as an opportunity, and I advise throughout the discussions that you will be having in these sessions to talk about how in developing countries we can take the lead in ensuring the interest of companies, organizations is very well captured in the future frameworks. If you look at SABIC in specific, sustainability is in SABIC's DNA. So we've been created on the back of a sustainability story. Back 50 years ago, when there used to be abundance, when there's abundance of associated gas in the kingdom, so building an economical business case for SABIC to be created and to produce useful products out of the flared gas, this has not only benefited SABIC and the ecosystem in Saudi financially, but also the full ecosystem, the social ecosystem, by creating jobs and developing the country, transferring technology, so on and so forth. So this is part of our culture as SABIC, and it continues to grow in the way that we deal with our customers, in the way that also we innovate and we go into creating more useful products in our industry. What we focused on in the recent couple of years is how we can showcase this. And here where ESG reporting comes as a very important element for SABIC as an organization. So we have created a dedicated steering committee headed by our CFO with membership from different executives in the organization, ultimately which reports to the executive management and to the board of directors. And the main drive for this committee basically is to draw gap analysis and to draw a roadmap in what ESG disclosures that we would like to showcase to basically investors and to other stakeholders. So we are underway in that. We have built on a very strong sustainability report that we've been issuing for more than 10 years. But as you know, it is an evolving area. So we're working with different frameworks and organizations in order really to have SABIC set of ESG disclosures that you will see coming in our annual report, and it will evolve going forward. I would like to leave you with a couple of things. One is that ESG reporting and disclosures is not about saying the right things. It is about implementing the right things in your organization and making sure that your own internal processes and buy-in from your employees and from the full organization for the good of the company and for the good of society. So that's very important, that you basically walk the talk. The second thing is working together, because ESG framework is developing, as I have said, to work together to ensure that the interest of your organization is very well captured in terms of what type of disclosures, what type of indices that you're going to get into, because it is an ever-changing and developing area. It is very important to be engaged. I again thank you for having me today. I appreciate the chance to address you at the beginning, and I really wish you to have a productive meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ayad, for such an insightful and precise overview on the topic. On that note, it's time to proceed to a keynote address while you keep the engagement going on the social media using the hashtag Championing India. I now take the opportunity to invite Ms. Ramya Krishnaswamy, Head ESG Initiative and member of the Executive Committee, World Economic Forum, Switzerland, for a keynote address. Welcome, Ms. Ramya.
Welcome to all of you. I'm Ramya Krishnaswamy. I'm head of the ESG initiative at the World Economic Forum, and I'm also the member of the Executive Committee. I'm delighted to be speaking with all of you today from Geneva, Switzerland. Before I start, I want to really share my sincere appreciation to SABIC and the Economic Times for bringing together this really important discussion in such a timely manner on economics, social and governance issues today. A quick moment. For those who may not know the World Economic Forum, we are an international organization for public-private cooperation. We are based in Geneva, Switzerland. We strive to really bring together different stakeholders of society to work on complex global issues. And over 1,000 companies around the world are working with us to help be a solution to many of these problems. And you may ask, why is the World Economic Forum looking to advance environmental, social, and governance practice? It goes back to a fundamental notion of advancing the idea of stakeholder capitalism. Citizens around the world are demanding from organizations, be it the investor, be it the customer, the employee, or even the governments in which companies are operating in. And why is that? I would like to at least state 3 key factors driving that trend. First and foremost, many of us around the world have experienced really a challenging set of few months during the pandemic. And if anything, the recovery from the pandemic has been far from equal and exacerbating existing inequalities even further. So there is a sense of wanting to bring better growth for all. And then the second reason is equality, inclusion, and diversity. I'll illustrate one point. Last year, the movement of Black Lives Matter took over in the United States of America like wildfire. And many of us in different countries and contexts can appreciate similar movements, civil movements that have taken place in our own countries and regions where people want to be really included in the economic and the social fabric. Finally, and last but not least in a way, just this month in Glasgow, global leaders, civil society, businesses all came together to collectively look for solutions on how we can protect the earth, environment, and nature, and ensure that we as businesses can contribute to them and not extract too much out of these important resources for the world. So these are the factors that are putting significant stakeholder pressure. And a large number of business leaders feel this pressure. And finally, what I would say is, with this being the case, there is imminent regulation around the world on how a company discloses its information on the use of carbon, how inclusive is it in its workforce, and how transparent are these governance principles. So it is really to ensure that we bring transparency and disclosure on how companies are acting as good stakeholders that the World Economic Forum has been engaging in this effort. When we started out this effort, we found out a huge challenge that did exist. What is that? A plethora of ways in which today one can find information, find the different standards, and voluntarily disclose on it. So we call it often the alphabet soup of standards. And that is one of the biggest challenges that companies, investors, and civil society face, because there is a range of these options and there are several methodologies that go into it. And equally, how does one compare these numbers, one versus the other? And how assurable are some of these numbers, right? This is a fundamental question many were asking. So how did we as the World Economic Forum look to provide a solution? We took, I would say, a three-pronged approach. First was really, we helped create a pragmatic and a simple set of metrics called the stakeholder capitalism metrics. And this set of metrics, in fact, were created with the significant engagement and support of the four audit firms, Deloitte, EY, KPMG, and PwC, who are very engaged with global companies on auditing, on helping them get ready to report. And this took place with the leadership of Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America. And what this led is to creation of a coalition of companies who voluntarily came forward and said, look, we want to actually come forward and report on this information because it's important for us, shareholders and our stakeholders. And finally, the momentum that created allowed us to start thinking about how can we create a global standard for sustainability reporting? Because we all know financial reporting has global standards and it ensures that companies, markets, and stakeholders have standard access to information that's comparable. So this is sort of the three-pronged approach we took. Pragmatic measures, proactive business stakeholders who came forward and tested this, and now starting to think about what does this all help towards contribution of a creation of a global standard. For those who are asking, what was in this pragmatic set of measures we put out? Fundamentally, we had 21 metrics that covered 4 key pillars. Principles of governance. Any listed company that has a very well-functioning board understands these are the key issues: the purpose, composition of the board, it's how it discloses information on anti-corruption principles and risk. And then the second very important metric set is around environment. Carbon emissions, how a company is starting to disclose on TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, The third element being biodiversity, land use, and nature sensitivity. And last but not least, water. The third pillar really involves people. How do we include people? How do we pay them? How the wage levels are? How much training do they receive? And how much is their health and safety a priority? And of course, the last but not least pillar being prosperity. And companies, by definition, bring so much prosperity to the society they operate in by creating jobs, by creating economic value, the fundamental research that they undertake, and of course, the tax that they pay. Now, with that said, where did we get to in this sort of journey that we undertook? We are absolutely delighted. In under 1 year, we had over 100 companies that supported this effort, and 50 companies started reporting on the 21 metrics I just shared, and those that were most important to them already in their financial reporting cycle. And people could ask, so why does it even matter? And where it starts to matter is some of the key figures you see on what I'm sharing. What we are learning is only 50 companies that have come forward and shared, so they pay over $140 trillion in taxes. And they are investing $1.5 trillion towards training their own employees. And these are important metrics that are only starting to emerge, and we will learn more and more what some of this means. And I'm going to take a special moment to congratulate SABIC and their team for engaging in this effort. And they are one of the few companies who have started reporting on these key metrics already in the 2021 financial reporting cycle. So sincere kudos to your team. Now, where do we go from here, you may ask? 100-something companies, it's a great thing. So how do we, in fact, make this set of standards develop consistent and comparable? And here is the next paradigm of area that we are working on. So as I said before, what makes financial standards very robust is they are comparable and they have standards, and it can be something that companies around the world can report on. And we as citizens, investors, and stakeholders have accountability. Similarly, we are working with the IFRS Foundation, which is essentially the body that has helped create the financial standards, who have now set up a foundation to help support the sustainability standards. So they created something called the ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board. And the goal of this organization is to help establish and deliver a global standard for sustainability reporting. I'll finish with one message to all of you today. It's really important in the context all of you may be in. I'll give one example. In India, in March this year, SEBI set out a set of disclosures for sustainability reporting, and many companies are starting to get ready to disclose on this year or in the coming 2 years. And SEBI is one of the markets that has, in fact, endorsed the formation of the International Sustainability Standards Board recently in November. So if I leave you with one message, prepare for this, build the necessary skills and competencies for ESG, and start your own company's journey of reporting. It's only going to help you be a very competitive company, keep your employees, win your customers, and demonstrate the value you're creating for society. Thank you very much, and please follow the work we are doing by following on the web link I shared here.
Thank you, Ms. Ramya, for sharing the global perspective on ESG for our audience. Now let us deep dive into this topic through our industry-wide roundtable discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, I now take the opportunity to invite Mr. Ashok Menon, Director, Sustainability Strategy, APAC, SABIC, to lead the roundtable discussion with our industry experts on the topic ESG Landscape, Future-Proofing Indian Businesses. Welcome, Mr. Menon.
I welcome you all to this virtual roundtable on ESG Landscape, future-proofing Indian businesses. Now, we would move forward with a quick round of introduction. So may I please request our esteemed speakers to briefly introduce themselves for our roundtable. I would start with Namita.
Thank you very much, Ashok. My name is Namita Vikas. I am the founder and managing director of Octus ESG, which is a sector specialist in sustainable finance, ESG, and climate risks management. Thank you.
Thank you, Namita. Constant, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yes, so my name is Constant van Aerschot. I'm based in Singapore, and I'm working for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is an industry association working exclusively with corporations on sustainability issues.
Thank you very much. Mr. Prabodha?
Good morning. Thanks, Ashok. My name is Prabodh Acharya. I am the Group Chief Sustainability Officer for the JSW Group. As you might be knowing, JSW Group has operations in steel, cement, energy, infrastructure, paints, sports, etc. So I look forward to a fruitful discussion, Ashok. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Rajan?
This is Mukund Rajan. I chair eCube Investment Advisors, which is an ESG platform that supports companies undertaking an ESG transition with investment and advice. I've also just co-authored a new book titled Outlast, How ESG Can Benefit Your Business.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Dr. Rajan. Frank?
So my name is Frank Kuipers. I'm General Manager Sustainability at SABIC. SABIC is a leading petrochemicals player in the world. I'm leading the team of sustainability globally. And of course, within sustainability, ESG and our ESG transparency is becoming more and more important, and something that we are looking forward to have as a panel discussion today.
Thank you for your kind introductions. We have a very powerful, diverse, and experienced panel today. So let me move forward and set the context before I start inviting each of the panel members for deliberation. Now, as we all know, right, social needs and business opportunities are coming together to transform the way companies craft strategies, drive performance, and report results. Governments, businesses, individuals are embracing a sense of responsibility that goes far beyond their own interest. Businesses have started thinking beyond financial capital. And what we see now, a transition from shareholder value creation to stakeholder value creation. Now, as we embark on this journey, we need to consider a truly integrated thinking and associated actions that takes into account environmental stewardship, social responsibility, and of course, a purposeful governance. Now, boardrooms have recognized these shifts and started to adopt ESG agenda as a strategic imperative for their respective groups. ESG will be the watermark running through our organization's strategic priority towards making a positive impact to our stakeholders. A critical attribute of ESG adherence is the availability to foster social changes, force transparency and accountability. And in this roundtable, our intention is to deliberate and seek advice from this esteemed panel on how to future-proof Indian businesses by integrating ESG attributes into mainstream. So without much ado, let me first invite Dr. Rajan. So let's start with the fundamentals, Dr. Rajan. What, according to you, are the key ESG indicators that Indian companies need to embrace?
Sure, Ashok. So as I point out in my book, I believe India is currently in the midst of what many would describe as an ESG crisis. So be it environmental issues such as air pollution, with 22 of the 30 most polluted cities in the world in India, or social issues to do with equity, diversity, and inclusion, where we have very poor indicators of gender diversity, for example, or governance issues reflected in the poor corporate governance that has led to thousands of cases being filed under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and high non-performing assets in the banking system, which are a big reason for India's economic underperformance. We are clearly in the midst of a crisis. So we need leadership in the Indian corporate sector that accepts this reality and is committed to changing it for the better. Now, as we saw 30 years back with economic liberalization, companies that fail to recognize that key stakeholders, including investors, financiers, customers, regulators, and civil society, are demanding better ESG performance, will be caught out by the new pace of change and fall behind their peers in India and overseas. So, what are the key ESG indicators companies need to embrace? I would argue that first and foremost is something that you touched upon, Ashok, which is ESG commitment in the articulation of a company's corporate purpose and vision. Why do they believe an ESG agenda is important? And aligning the organization's values and code of conduct with these. Having done that, companies need to put in place good governance mechanisms, including board level ESG capabilities, clarify their ESG strategy with clear targets, identify an execution roadmap that empowered executives are tasked to deliver, and link executive compensation to performance on key ESG performance milestones. With the leadership and direction expected from the board, I think it's worth mentioning that increasing numbers of Indian companies are either constituting a dedicated ESG committee of the board, take companies like Infosys, Ashok Leyland, and Airtel, or including an ESG and sustainability focus in the mandate of the CSR committee of the board, like several Tata companies, including Tata Steel, have done. Now, each company, depending on the sector it operates in and its own specific context, including whether it's family run or professionally managed, for instance, will have to develop a bespoke ESG strategy based on material ESG considerations. And materiality is an important concept. Material ESG issues can vary across sectors. So climate change, for instance, may be a material ESG issue for a large fossil fuel-based energy consumer, like a steel company, but may not have the same relevance for, say, a company that offers web design services. So allowing for the variance between sectors, I think there are clearly a set of ESG indicators that appear top of mind for many stakeholders in India. So if I start with the E of ESG or environment, I think issues across air, water, and land management, biodiversity protection, and the management of waste, including through embracing a circular economy approach. Within these, the issues around climate change and global warming, reflected in indicators like carbon emissions, are obviously very relevant, especially given the new and ambitious targets that India has set out for itself at COP26, the Glasgow Convention on Climate Change, where India has adopted a net zero by 2070 target, and other ambitious targets in energy efficiency improvement and deployment of renewable and non-fossil fuel energy. On the S of ESG, or the social dimension, critical indicators in India would include how companies are addressing diversity, including female participation, and the absorption of members of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities in the workforce, employee welfare and safety, the treatment of labor, including not just the permanent workforce, but also contract labor, human rights, both within the company and in the supply chain, and engagement with the local community on issues that impact their quality of life. And on the governance dimension, or the G of ESG, I think critical indicators would include clarity on the governance structure to supervise delivery of outcomes, with strong evaluation protocols and investment in training, diversity within the board's composition, with an adequate complement of well-qualified independent directors, and a strong chairperson. And I think this will also get linked to the requirement in the Indian public markets from next year to separate the roles of chairman and CEO. The quality of disclosure on policies and strategies across critical domains, including cybersecurity and social media engagement, and deployment of a well-designed code of conduct and an ethics framework that addresses common issues in the Indian context, including bribery, corruption, conflict of interest, and the need to have a strong whistleblower mechanism in place. Let me end by saying that companies will be tested on the transparency of the reporting on all of these indicators and more. So from next year, we have the business responsibility and sustainability reporting requirement that the Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI, has defined for the top 1,000 listed companies. Many stakeholders, including ratings agencies, investors, analysts, regulators themselves, nonprofits, and others are going to be closely scrutinizing these reports And from naming and shaming to withdrawal of investment, I think there are going to be many consequences for those companies that fail to measure up to the expectations of the stakeholders. Back to you.
Thank you very much for so beautifully summarizing these indicators, Dr. Rajan. First, I would like to congratulate you for your upcoming book. We are all looking forward because there are not many such books which talks about the ESG practices. So we are all keenly looking forward for reading these books as and when it gets launched. Connected to what Dr. Rajan mentioned. So I move on to Prabodha. So first, again, congratulations to you too, Prabodha, primarily for having JSW Steel entering into DJSI index. It's not that easy for companies to get into DJSI, and you have managed to get there. So we would like to kind of understand from you as to what's the significance of an Indian company getting listed in DJSI, and were there any specific steps you took to kind of get listed here, Prabodha?
Thank you very much, Ashok, for asking me a very practical question, what we did. But having listened Dr. Rajan, I can only advise that if companies follow all those indicators he mentioned, then it will be an easy cakewalk for the companies to get recognized or included in any index, whether it is DJSI or any ESG ratings. It will not be difficult. But what is going to be difficult to follow the path what Mr. Rajan just now detailed out. Now, yes, thank you very much for congratulating us, and we really feel elated that we were included in DJSI index. Now, just let me give a background that how it happens and what actions we took so that companies can find inspiration from. Now, DJSI World Universe of Broad Market Index contains almost 10,000 companies. And they invite the largest around 3,500 companies for the corporate sustainability assessment, what they did every year. And out of that, the top 10 or 20% companies who have performed well in their ESG parameters as per their methodology get ranked in different index. And that includes world index and also the regional indexes. It's really a matter of pride for Indian companies. I would say that 5 Indian companies have been listed in the DJSI World Index, and 15 Indian companies have been listed in the Emerging Market Index. So it's a fact that more and more Indian companies are embracing the ESG or sustainability strategy into their business strategies and working towards improving all aspects 360 degree instead of only, because also you did mention about shareholder value versus stakeholder value. So that is where they are focusing on the shareholder values. So if you look at DJSI indicators, they get evaluated against economic, environment, and social aspect. They don't call it governance because the governance is part of economy, where it includes one of the important things which Dr. Rajan also included about the materiality. So they cover corporate governance, materiality, risk and crisis management, codes of conduct, customer relations management, policy influence, supply chain management, tax strategy, and information security. This all together forms the economy parameter, which is 34% weightages. And then in environment, it has environmental reporting aspects, policy and management system aspects, eco-efficiency aspect, biodiversity, climate strategy, water-related risk. That constitute almost 33% of the parameter where the companies get evaluated. The rest becomes social, where it's also mentions about social reporting, labor practice indicators, human rights, human capital development, talent attractions and retention, corporate citizenship and philanthropy, which is CSR, we know, occupational health safety, social impacts on communities. All this balance 33% they evaluate. Now, for a companies, if you look at our journey, even we are taking this journey for last 3 years, and consistently we are looking at what are the improvement we can make. Now, what is important, I think that is also Dr. Rajan touched upon about transparency in your disclosures. And that's one of the important factor. And then whatever disclosure has been made, they are supported with evidence and publicly available. So when it is publicly available, then the company has now made it obligations for them to get scrutinized by anybody. So the facts are more reliable. And that is how it gets evaluated. And if any companies want to take this path forward, I would say they would start from the fundamentals, as Dr. Rajan mentioned, about defining their vision and what they want to do, and then lay out a broad strategy to implement to achieve those vision statements, which if you look at, that is what exactly we have done. And then link your materiality issue and address those based on what the all stakeholder looking towards. And that is how you can possibly go into better ranking. DJSI, of course, is one of the examples, but there are many ESG rating agencies who are rating. But most importantly for organizations, what you believe in the growth, and how, I think a word you used also in the opening statement about how as a business you future-proof your business. It's not only by making good profits, a business can future-proof themselves. So this is where the importance of ESG is coming into play. And that is where these international rating agencies are taking cognizance of. So with that, I'll stop and will like to discuss further if there is any questions also.
Thank you so much, Prabodha. This has been very, very educational, and more importantly, what I like you mentioned about is the importance of what you believe in, and using that how you position yourself, and let the fundamentals take care of the remaining. So thanks for these inputs. Now, moving from here to Namita. Now, Namita, you have been breathing sustainability for a number of years now. And rightfully, you have received a lot of accolades, including from WBCSD, ranking you as a leading woman in business sustainability. So based on your experiences, how do you think ESG be used as an opportunity, and how can organizations enhance their ESG disclosures?
Thank you very much, Ashok, for the question. And I'm so glad to be here with all the fellow panelists. Mukund and Prabodha very eloquently highlighted how ESG has emerged, to be an important factor today of businesses. And what we are seeing is there are tighter linkages of ESG with investments and finance. And there's also a growing awareness of intersectional challenges arising out of climate change and the related issues that has brought ESG into the fore. So as a criteria, ESG has provided or is providing a holistic overview that can inform investment decisions much better than traditional and myopic financial considerations. And increasingly, data is also showing that ESG has a strong, robust business case, stronger than those models that don't incorporate ESG, right? Prabodha has just mentioned how, being on DJSI can attract more and more investments. And we have seen how the sustainability themed index, like the Nifty ESG 100 has outperformed the Nifty 100 between 2020 and 2021. And this trend, which follows from ESG funds outperforming traditional funds, in spite of COVID pandemic, so there is certainly a business case. And we've seen companies performing better on ESG parameters, becoming more competitive, generating better returns, leading to higher profitability. And also data is showing that, better ESG scores, those companies with better ESG scores are able to foresee the changes and adapt to them better. So, future proofing, again, I'm coming to this, which is very important from a financial sector perspective. And of course, there are market pressures which are driving various stakeholders to adopt ESG best practices into their decision making. So, we've seen how globally investors are increasingly demanding ESG matrix into their portfolio companies, how they're allocating capital, or even introducing the stewardship criteria. A recent 2021 Global Investor Survey by EY found that 74% of institutional investors are now more likely to divest based on poor ESG performance than before the COVID pandemic. And 90% have stated that they will pay more attention to companies' ESG performance. So therefore, this is a big opportunity. In India, We know about the SEBI's BRSR, which is a major thrust from a regulatory standpoint in improving this entire space. Now, these kind of trends coupled with the strong growth of ESG assets in India, we saw, there were a handful of ESG focused funds, mutual funds that were introduced, that were launched in India. But what happened in 2020 was 6 ESG funds launched by groups like Aditya Birla, Axis, ICICI Prudential. I think that really set a kind of a market movement, and by March 2021, the net inflows into these funds were close to 678 crore rupees compared to a mere 68 crore rupees in the previous year. So this is really looking at how businesses, how financial sector is looking at the opportunities that are emerging, and where are these opportunities sitting. I think it's very important to note to be able to map those. So one, I think if you look at the larger picture, look at India and its SDG and NDC commitments, right? India has made it a national priority to look at ESG parameters. Its net zero pledge that it took at COP26. I think this is making the ESG opportunity ripe for picking. And then there are green shoots that are visible. We've seen how some of the India's biggest companies have declared net zero targets, including large groups like Reliance, Tata Consulting. In banks, it's HDFC, which is leading this area. And I think what is important to note here is that the companies are allocating capital or even borrowing capital to look at their ESG mandates. For example, Godrej and Boyce, announced its ESG goals along with investment targets for the next 10 years. And the company has invested over 66 million USD in ESG initiatives, which is also looking at, to generate almost over 1/3 of its revenues from the good and the green products by FY 2022. Axis recently announced that its board level ESG committee would provide an oversight, provide specialized focus guidance relating to ESG to the bank. Now, despite these positive strides, I think there's a compelling need. So while at industry level, there is movement, there's a compelling need for financial services to go hand in hand with these kind of interventions to grab the opportunity. And, banking sector here plays a very, very important role. So SDG itself is a $2.6 trillion opportunity for India. And that is where the opportunity for banking sector sits, right? So if you look at, eligible categories within which the banking sector under the priority sector norms lend, it includes agriculture, MSME, housing, education, advancing loans to weaker sectors of the society. I think all this is very intertwined with the 17 SDGs or the NDCs, and a greater push to financing these areas towards climate mitigation, adaptation, extending credit to women, socially disadvantaged groups. I think that is really what is needed. So, in short, connecting the dots between India's commitments, ESG considerations, the products, the lending lines within banks would really help map the progress, tagging of assets, and open up huge opportunities for each institution from within the businesses and from an impact standpoint. So I think that is on the opportunity side. Of course, the sustainable, it's an important mention here. The sustainable debt market has reached new milestones. We've seen the Q3 roundup showed a combined sustainable debt issuance to be at about 779 billion. And it's commendable for, organizations in the hard to abate sector like JSW Steel to issue its $1 billion sustainability linked dual tranche bond, which is, one of the first ever in the steel sector kind of a bond that was launched. I think these are how opportunities can be leveraged. And I think that is a very important area to look at. On disclosures, my last point, I think enabling triple bottom line accounting and managing financial ESG risks and opportunities are ways to open the doors. Mukund highlighted a lot of that. Better performances, better resilience, better returns, and enhanced disclosures. I think this is a very important aspect. Just take the textile sector, for example, they have started to very deeply embed sustainability and circularity in the realm of its value chain. And this is being achieved by, for example, obtaining sustainable cotton, for example, through Better Cotton Initiative, converting waste fibers into cotton fibers, or using recycled polyester made from recycled plastic as sustainable raw material, thus reducing the waste to landfill. I think these are really very strategic approaches to how one can tap into the opportunity, and disclosures on these parts. Very, very clear, transparent disclosures on these parts will pull in the investors. So I think that's a very, important to understand how sustainability information serves a broader group of stakeholders, but needs to be looked at from a lens the way we look at financial reporting. And, getting out of this alphabet soup is very, very important, because there are multiple frameworks, what works, what doesn't work, and which framework to report on. I think this is what at a customized level needs to be looked at for enhancement of disclosures. I'll stop here and maybe take a question later. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Namita, and I think well said. And it is really heartening to see that at least in India, the ESG practices are yielding results, and more companies are moving in this direction. So it's going to play a big role in meeting India's climate agenda as well as the 2030 SDGs. I think. Thanks for your inputs. Now, moving to Frank, driving a sustainability agenda in a global company is always a challenge. So SABIC is onboarding the ESG journey. So could you share the steps SABIC undertook to get ESG into the mainstream, and what kind of governance structures are we looking at from a chemical industry perspective?
Well, thanks, Ashok, for this great question, which is at the same time also a challenging question, I think. So just to go back a few years, SABIC, sometime 15 years ago, started to report or to think about reporting on sustainability. So we have already entered on the journey of reporting and transparency on certain establishments in the company over the past more than 10 years. In that journey, we also recognize that, of course, at a certain moment in time, the purpose of a company is becoming more and more important. And that goes way beyond, as what already was mentioned by several speakers before, that you go beyond your financial returns, your direct financial returns. And in that sense, we took on board also several ESG metrics in terms of reporting. However, that was never done in a holistic way. And exactly as what you said, for a global company, it's certainly a challenge to see, well, what and how will reporting on ESG look like? What are the governance systems? What are the, let's say, the frameworks you report against? And companies like ours immediately like to look at, well, what are the standards that we have to live up to? And if you then look into how ESG developed over the past 10 years, first of all, you see that this is a huge landscape that has really tremendously changed from where we were 10 years ago, but it's still in motion. We saw that, I would say, about 2 years ago, when we also recognize that we have to much more rigorously develop that into our own governance, into our own system. So within SABIC, we do have a sustainability council where, let's say, all the decisions are being taken from a sustainability angle vis-a-vis the stakeholders, where we do also go through our materiality and our assessments on what the priorities of the company are. In that same Sustainability Council, we recognized that we have to really step up in terms of ESG disclosures. Although we already disclose quite a few metrics and our transparency is at a certain level, which I would say is at least the mainstream of transparency, we recognize that also with the stakeholder capitalism of World Economic Forum and for large accounting firms, that we have to get into the next stage of reporting. So what we established was a ESG reporting steering committee, where we first started to say, well, let's scan what is now our gap towards where we would like to be. And of course, then there's two different ways of looking at ESG. One is, what is the external world telling us? What is that the stakeholders want us to show and to share and to be transparent about? And the second viewpoint is, what is it that we want to share with our stakeholders? And so it's the inside out and the outside in view. Those are coming together. And so there is where you come with what I would say the prioritization of what is important for the company to disclose. Because you cannot just onboard everything and start reporting on everything. So you have to come up with what are your priorities in terms of the short, the medium, and the long-term reporting. And so that was the first step we took. It took us at least a year, I think, to come to a reasonable overview of how those priorities look like. And then it is very important that within establishing a proper governance, where ultimately the board is responsible, accountable for everything that we disclose, but then also trickling down through the organization where the final responsibility in the organization needs to settle in order to make sure that you have a diligent way of reporting, that your that the facts that you are creating are indeed also being accounted for, and that you can have, let's say, assurance around all the numbers that you share with the external world, so that we are all talking about facts. And we are living in a world where facts are becoming, I think, more and more important, and therefore also transparency is becoming more and more important. Now, by doing that, you go through a structure, a rigorous structure, where you create ownership. You create ownership either at businesses or at a function, where you establish who owns what part of that overall reporting and transparency that you're trying to create. At the same time, of course, it is a holistic company responsibility and accountability. But it is very important from a governance point of view to create ownership within the company. Now, we are in the midst of finalizing how such a roadmap should look like on the short, the medium, and the long term. It is very well said that I think there is at least 50% of what we want to disclose is something we can disclose, and we are already disclosing today. But we also see that there is medium and long-term disclosures that still require certainly data assurance and data quality in order to make sure that you are a reputable company in terms of how you report. Because I think very important in terms of being a company which is purpose-driven, and you also have to be, let's say, recognized as being very reputable and making sure that the quality that you disclose on is at a very high standard, because that creates the reliability of a company. That's also very important to stakeholders, and beyond, let's say, the financial stakeholders. I think also the stakeholders that give the companies the freedom and the opportunity to not only survive today, but to be there 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years from today. Of course, things like climate, things like circularity of our materials, things like chemicals of concern are very important from an environmental point of view. Beyond that, I think that also the social angle and the governance angle have reached a level within the company which is equal, so that you have a balanced way of reporting between the three different, let's say, domains of environment, social, and governance. That's the way how we put it into practice. As said, it's a journey. It's going to take at least another 5 years before we are where we think we want to be in the next couple of years. And it will remain a dynamic situation and positioning. So it will continue to develop. And that also will, of course, help us to see what will be ultimately the framework, the standards that will develop globally that we are going to report on. That's how we are approaching it, and it's a great and it's a fantastic journey, I can tell you.
Thanks a lot, Frank, for articulating each step in such a wonderful manner. I think these steps that you have articulated will be kind of helping a lot of Indian industries to start looking at what are the steps they need to take. May not be all the steps, but there are specific steps that you spoke about is going to kind of help them to onboard this journey. And I also understand the complexity associated with it. And I also see one of the important attributes that you brought about the assurance part, which actually the previous speakers did speak about the transparency, and that assurance plays an important role in bringing in the credibility to what organizations speak. Thanks a lot for your input, Frank. Now, moving to Constant. Now, Constant, you did hear many speakers, Frank as well as Namita, talk about frameworks, and Peter Barker also mentioned last year there are more than 600 ESG ranking and ratings, and there are more than 4,500 ESG key performance indicators, and that's what makes ESG look pretty complex. So with so many frameworks and rating agencies, what is the key advice WBCSD has to give organizations to advance their ESG positions?
Well, thank you for having me. I think the numbers you mentioned, they sound horrible, but in fact, if you look behind it, it's actually very good news. And why I'm saying this is because those who produce those ratings are actually investment companies, and we are facing an emergency, and we are focusing on 4 topics, which are climate change, biodiversity, inequality, and a very important aspect of the evolution of capitalism. So having investment firms creating ratings is actually a good news, because where the money is, things change. So first, what is a ESG rating? Is basically looking at how a company manages ESG issues that are material to them. And basically the way it is done is through different frameworks, and is really establishing an assessment around specific criteria per industry, and then you compare with the peers. So this every investment companies can come up with its own criteria, and that's why you have those big numbers that you mentioned. So what is the advice? And that previous speakers have mentioned this already. What are the how to get a good rating by investment companies? And it's basically disclosing on a regular manner relevant ESG information in a consistent and transparent manner, and be honest about it. I used to work for Lafarge, the cement company. We had indicators, and some we were far behind, some we actually achieved before the deadline. So as long as you can explain why you did not achieve some, there are reasons, and then set still ambitious goals and then correct the course, it's okay. But as long as, I think other speakers mentioned this, the importance of being transparent, but also being consistent, using the same framework and same indicators along the way is very important. So what are the steps for a company to engage in this? Is really having an environmental management system in place and a process to actually follow it. It's basically how you manage your business. And I think that's a difference between CSR and sustainability. CSR is as we all know, is more philanthropy, what you do with your profit. Where sustainability is how to make the profit, how you manage your business. And that's where I think Namita mentioned this as well, that ESG companies who are good at doing ESG actually perform better on the stock market when they have a downturn, and there is more evidence. So having a good rating means having good disclosure, having good environmental management system that provides the data for the management to take the better decisions. And the benefit of this is clearly lower cost of capital, because if you have good ESG framework, KPIs, and management, very naturally your risk profile will go down. because you will be more resilient. You will have looked at the issues linked to your suppliers, to your clients, and that means lower cost of capital, because every financial institution will look at, okay, how risky is your business? Is it well managed? And if the answers is positive, then my investment will have will bring less interest rate. So that's a bit the big numbers are maybe not good news. The good news is that investors are looking into it, pushing for more quality ESG to make sure investments are less risky. And with this, I pause. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for these insights. And for me, the key takeaway here, what you said, is identifying relevant ESG indicators within the organization. That's important, need to be transparent. And the key word I see here is consistent. So be consistent irrespective of the framework that you are using. And again, you have also reiterated the fact that companies which have advanced in their ESG indicators, which have good ESG indicators or good scores, do make profit, and it makes business sense. So I think that's a pretty important statement that you are again reiterating. Thanks for your inputs on this. Now from here, moving to, since we were talking about framework, so I would move to Namita again. So Namita, you have been in many of the committees which are looking at TCFD. Now TCFD seems to be one of the frameworks that is gaining a lot of popularity. It's also becoming important, and then some of the countries are making this mandatory. So what is the reason, and how best the Indian organization can adopt this particular framework? So if you could throw some light on this, that would be great, Namita.
Thanks, Ashok, once again. The growing TCFD popularity, I think that's what one needs to look at. So, like Constant also mentioned that, frameworks, and particularly TCFD was formed by the Financial Stability Board in 2015 to help identify the information needed by investors, lenders, and insurance underwriters to appropriately assess and price climate-related risks and opportunities. So, this is a very important aspect where it's a strong linkage again with the financial sector and the lending, and it is all about money, right? So I think it is something that's come up the curve very fast. Additionally, TCFD also, works towards building greater understanding of the considerations of climate-related assets in the financial sector and the financial system's exposure to climate risks. So I think that's a very important point to be kept in mind. Now, you asked, why is it gaining so much of popularity? And I think, there are multiple reasons, if I may. So one is, it is one of the first mainstream guidance documents issued for investors, lenders, and insurance underwriters for understanding material risks to develop voluntary, consistent climate-related financial disclosures. So that's an important aspect, that it's mainstream. Second, it is, its popularity is also on account of the ease of its usability. So that's very important, and its comprehensiveness. So it is, it very proactively addresses investors' demand for climate-related information in a format that is prescribed by the investors and increasingly asked for. So I think that is why it has assumed its importance, and the recommendations of the TCFD also emphasize on climate-related risks, opportunities, and financial impact. So, for example, banks who are the providers of capital need to identify new risks and opportunities arising from climate change and capture financial impact of their lending or investment portfolios. So that's the second point. The third is, mainstream organizations, the Basel Committee, which provides overall guidance to the banking sector. The banking supervision of the Department of the Banking of the Basel Committee has used TCFD to formalize its climate-related financial risk assessment methodologies. So they are based on, they've stacked it up on TCFD. My fourth point is, the reason is many jurisdictions across the world have aligned with TCFD and have passed regulations on its adoption. UK, New Zealand, European Union, Brazil, Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, Switzerland. And in addition to that, since the G20 countries have endorsed mandatory disclosures under TCFD earlier this year, it is evident that the 20 would adopt it in some form, and then there's a cascading effect that will be seen across markets, right? So I think this is one of the main reasons why I think TCFD has gained so much of popularity. On the other side, the TCFD recommendations are very well structured around 4 thematic areas that represent core elements of how organizations operate. And these are, the first one is governance, where, it's around climate risk and opportunities, management and the board's role in assessing and managing climate risks and opportunities. Then at a strategy level, so governance strategy, where disclosures of actual and potential impacts of climate risks and opportunities that need to be identified over short and long term on the organization's business strategy and financial planning. So it's very, very core to business. The third is on risk management, where it needs disclosures on how this process of identifying, assessing, and managing climate-related risks are integrated with the overall management risk management framework within an organization. And finally, on matrix and targets, where disclosures of the matrix used to assess climate risks and opportunities and related targets, and also the targets used to manage climate risk and performance against this target. So it's not just about, what we've seen is in many frameworks, it asks about what are the targets that companies are setting. But here, it is not only asking for what are the targets, but what is the performance against these targets, and that needs disclosure. So in many ways, these are more comprehensive, they're adoptable by all organizations, they're designed to solicit useful forward-looking information on potential financial impacts of climate change. They also bring in, futurity to climate-related issues into the present through scenario analysis. So I think that is a very important element of how scenario analysis can be done on how your impacts of future can be assessed on the present. And a strong focus on transition risks and related opportunities. I think those are some of the very important areas. And we've seen, how BRSR also is covering, the SEBI BRSR is covering a number of ESG related disclosures that were previously not there as a part of the BRR. And therefore, harnessing a type of a culture of disclosure that is evolving in India, where the disclosures would be more enhanced. And, Mukund mentioned this, that, it's going to be naming and shaming kind of a thing. And, somewhere SEBI has also taken into account, the TCFD or international, what has evolved internationally. So TCFD may take a secondary role as far as India is concerned, but most certainly it may not be completely absent from the Indian landscape. So how companies need to take that into aspect? I think, one is publicly declare support for TCFD because it is a way to ease in reporting and align with the recommendations. It's easier than multiple other frameworks that are there. Then the other area is making climate action a boardroom agenda and securing support from senior leadership and management to obtain sufficient sources to undertake such an extensive reporting exercise. See, I think, making a business case, and TCFD allows companies to make it a business case. Like Prabodha also mentioned, how do you get in the top-down kind of an approach and a bottoms-up kind of an approach is very important. So that support or that mind share of the leadership is very, very important for things to happen. And when it's a business case, when it's linked to financial planning, I think it becomes an important area to demonstrate the impact and therefore TCFD reporting. Also to tackle the lack of reliable regional climate models, collaborating with governments, research institutions, and leading private institutions also becomes very, very critical, right? Because climate modeling is a complex area, and there are multiple tools that are available as like we have in reporting. So how do you build on this predictive capabilities of others to be able to help organizations? I think that is very, very important in terms of what companies can do. I think to conclude, I believe that high quality, reliable and comparable ESG data from every major company on the planet, investors and other decision makers will definitely help in setting the platform to mainstream better informed decisions, which leads to a more sustainable economy, or what we heard at COP26, a very alarming situation that faces us. I think measurement is one step towards mitigation or adaptation, and whatever framework works. But I think these are the advantages that TCFD bring to the table. Thank you. Thank you, Ashok. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Namita, for this explanation. And what I particularly liked about the statement you made is this is one of the few frameworks which is forward-looking. And if you want to future-proof any organization, forward-looking frameworks are absolutely essential, which looks at risks, not just the risk, but also the opportunity. And that's the reason, and it's addressing one of the biggest trends, that is climate. And that's what is the focus for many of the investors today. So thanks for this share, Namita. So moving from TCFD, we did highlight about climate. So Frank, over to you. Climate is becoming one of the important components of the mega trend. And in light of the new normal and the climate agenda, how do you think ESG is going to help? Could you throw some light from an industry or chemical industry perspective? That would be great.
Absolutely. And before entering into why and how ESG will help in setting your, let's say, your climate roadmap, I want to also give another, let's say, light on it, because I think that there's many more attributes that are so important as we speak. And I already mentioned earlier circularity, chemicals of concern. And you see in Europe in the Green Deal that all these elements, whether it is carbon reduction or circularity or chemicals, safety for chemicals, they are equally important. What is, I think, critical, which also was just mentioned by Namita, is forward-looking, and how do you bring this in your risk assessments, and how do you make it tangible? For companies, it's very important to have a business case at the end of the day. And in a business case, forward-looking is very important, and we are used to look into price scenarios of our materials or chemicals that we sell for years, and we do that already for 5 decades, 6 decades, and what have you. What we're not used to do is how do you bring into that same business model the forward-looking of the impact of the 3 elements that I just mentioned, of circularity, of climate change, of chemicals. And in that respect, I think that ESG helps to a very large extent in, first of all, if you look into TCFD as a framework that puts at least let's say the company back to considering what the impacts are, not only from a risk point of view, to be honest, but also, as you mentioned yourself, an opportunity which is in there, but also to take it to a certain level, what is the reality that we are facing. If I look into, let's say, how do we develop currently our roadmap to what I would say carbon neutrality, and because as a company we did already pledge for carbon neutrality by the mid of this century, 2050. But then how are we going to achieve that, and how does that roadmap look like? And then, let's say, scenarios are important. Carbon, let's say, price scenarios are very important for a company because they will start telling you what the impact is, what the risk is if you do nothing. And so in a business as usual scenario. And therefore you see that there is abatement cost curves that you will easily develop by introducing either, let's say, directly technologies available to go from fossil or carbon emission to carbon neutrality in certain unit operations in your plants or what have you. But there's also, let's say, the element of the medium and the long-term developments that you require. And that requires much more, let's say, investment into innovation, into new technologies, which is normally also associated with much more risk. And there, if you bring carbon scenarios, carbon price scenarios into the development of your roadmaps, you can much more easily look into also assessing multiple innovations to be assessed at the same time in order to make sure that they will arrive from a technical readiness level today of less than 5 to a technical readiness level of 9, 10 years from today, because that's necessary in order to make the transformation. At the same time, we have to understand that the capital that companies spend will be, let's say, also restricted, and therefore to really look into what is necessary for the entire period from now until 2050, how are you going to spend your capital in both, let's say, new developments of new products or new chemicals, but at the same time, the entire transformation you have to go through. And so that's the balance that we are now, let's say, establishing and we are also assessing, which means that you will have a very clear articulation of your business plan over the next 5 years. What is it that you will implement within now and 25 or within now and 2030, because that's pretty clear and visible, which also tells you what the targets will be that you will achieve by 2030, because they are pretty clear what you can do. And then as a company, we are also pretty, let's say, relaxed in terms of the number games that are ongoing currently, because there's let's say, a target that you have to reach by the mid of this century, which is clear for all of us, I think. And then there is a route that we have to achieve it along, and how you are establishing that roadmap. Well, those will come together, and those will then also ultimately balance the capital spend on a yearly basis over the next 3 decades to come, to go from incremental and some step changes on unit operation level for the first 5 to 10 years to really disruptive changes over the next 2 decades to come after that, which will really transform not only our industry, not only our sectors, but all the sectors. And you see that ongoing, whether that's the cement sector, whether that's the steel sector, whether that's even, let's say, the utility sector. All of those sectors are going through the same transformation and will face the same kind of roadmap that they have to develop in order to spend the capital in a wise way against the scenarios developed by those companies on a carbon price, on a business platform, in let's say, balancing it with your own internal enterprise risk management approaches. And there, a framework like TCFD is a wonderful tool to help companies like us.
Thanks a lot, Frank. And then just adding to that, I think the journey that we have onboarded on electrifying our crackers with BASF and Linde again is a great example of how we're developing the technology and how we would require financing using a future scenario analysis, and not necessarily all finance may come internally. And for these, our ESG position needs to be pretty strong on this regard. So thanks for this share, Frank. Now from Frank, moving to Dr. Rajan. So Dr. Rajan, you have been with corporates earlier on, and you have looked at how to develop the ESG propositions from a corporate angle. And now you have moved and started your own organizations, and you are helping policymakers and corporate to kind of drive ESG. So you're in a unique position where you have worn both the hats as such. So according to you, Dr. Rajan, what are the ESG criteria? How does it impact investment decisions and the portfolio construction as such?
Sure. So I actually, in my previous life, I was also a private equity investor. So let me actually maybe address this question from the perspective of folks who actually wear an equity investor's hat and are looking at opportunities in the market. So really, I think as some of the panelists mentioned earlier, for investors, essentially, good performance on material ESG indicators will offer some reassurance that risks that a corporate carries are being managed well, that the company will be more resilient in the face of challenges to the market presence, and may be able to address new opportunities that open up by being ahead on the ESG curve. So many investment funds today would typically follow an exclusionary approach where they'll exclude sectors or companies that they believe carry high ESG risks. So for instance, companies that rely very heavily on fossil fuel consumption, like thermal power producers, are increasingly getting excluded as portfolios get decarbonized. Some of the funds will also see opportunity where ESG performance may actually be relatively poor or modest currently in certain companies, but they feel that with constructive engagement, if this can be improved, then these companies can actually outperform in the market. So that's what you might call an active engagement approach, as opposed to merely remaining passive. And at one end of that engagement approach, you actually have what are called the activist funds, which on occasion are willing to adopt even intermediary tactics like voting to replace board directors in a company or replace the CEOs in order to drive change. We haven't seen much of that in India yet. We've seen the beginnings of it, but it's much more prevalent outside the country. But I think you're going to see many more activist funds coming to India. Then you have investors who will select specific ESG criteria that they believe reveal significant opportunity for growth and returns. We've talked a lot about the impact of climate change. So the climate technology space now is beginning to receive a lot of attention. And that includes the entire electric vehicle ecosystem in India, which is becoming very hot. So you have investors who are building portfolios around these kinds of themes. And of course, some of them are looking at it from a social lens, a social impact lens, and they're focusing on themes like healthcare, education, or women's empowerment. And in each of these approaches, I think there are obviously nuances. So each of these approaches of exclusion, active engagement, activism, sustainability, and impact, you will find sort of funds that approach it a little differently also. The important thing is once the strategy is clear, then the investors are trying to see the trade-off between risk and reward. The risk, as I mentioned earlier, in a poorly performing company from an ESG perspective may be quite high. But if the investor sees a way in which this performance can be improved, then the reward may also be very high. The last point I'll make is that one of the factors, particularly the public markets, that influences reward is really to do with timing. People often sometimes will compare ESG-focused funds with other funds, and in some periods of time, you actually see funds performing more or less the same, perhaps. The one thing I'll say is you may see a great ESG performing company, but if you invest after the rest of the market has already piled in, then obviously your returns are going to be suboptimal. So that's a factor that is very important when you're constructing portfolios. You want to also get your timing right. So you want to back companies where a lot of the gain is actually ahead of you rather than behind you because it's already very good ESG stocks. And in India, I think some of the best performing funds have tended to back already large cap companies that have taken this agenda seriously. And over a period of time, you will see returns plateauing. What you then need to gear up for as an investor is to see the next wave of companies in the public markets, for instance, the small and mid cap companies that are now bracing for the ESG changes and really embracing some of these changes actively and will become tomorrow's large caps. So timing is also very important, particularly in the public markets, but equally to an extent in the private markets as well.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Rajan. So I think again the key takeaway: having a clear strategy, understanding the risks and rewards, and positioning yourself in a simple manner to kind of move forward accordingly. What I would say. From here, I would move to Mr. Prabodha. You have a large presence in India, and being a steel industry, you have your own challenges when it comes to emissions and many other ESG attributes. So, what could be your advice to countries or organizations in India as to what are the key challenges they could kind of face and what are the ways in which they could address them based on your experience?
Thank you, Ashok. Thanks for that questions. Being a practitioner in this field for last 30 years, let me talk what I have faced and what's my experience, the organizations, and we as a professional face when it comes to sustainability and ESG. I think I see two very clear challenges for for the professionals like us and also for the organizations to drive sustainability and ESG. One is clarity. Second is communicating across the organizations about what you have brought in the clarity. Okay, let me explain. The first thing we talk about ESG and sustainability as a, in the same breath. To me, ESG is a risk assessment tool specifically looked by the investor to ensure that that money what they are investing, they are in the safe hands in the business, so that they are managing the business holistically in a way that they are taking care of all the risk, not excluding the ESG risk. But when it comes to sustainability, I think this is a broader concept in the sense that it is the way of doing a business, having right system and processes to ensure that your business not only exists, it thrives. So it is much bigger than only looking at ESG risk. And what I like to communicate is that to have right communication and perception with all organizations, functions, look this as an opportunity. I think Constant talked about that when money is linked in anything, in my belief, it moves faster. So your communications, if you can link with the opportunity, because that's where you see money, then your acceptance becomes easier and you can drive that more easily. Let me give example of what we are doing in JSW in terms of both bringing in clarity and communicating. Let me give some examples. Bringing in clarity, the first thing is that what you understand by sustainability, what do you mean? And that is where I think Dr. Rajan told in the beginning that having right vision is very important. But again, having right vision and then communicating across is also very important. For example, we have set a vision very clearly based on 3 responsibility, which is aligned with the environmental, social, and ethical responsibility. Because we believe ethical responsibility is much broader than only looking at the governance responsibility. But at the same time, how do you monitor and continue to communicate across is very important. That is part of your vision statement. So having a vision statement is itself will not bring in the clarity. So you need a strategy. And that is where we have next level made a strategy based on 8 pillars, right from leadership to reporting. So all the aspects we have covered. But having strategy, it's very important that you have right framework, right pillars. And that is what we call structure or the framework. And that is where the materiality is important. Looking at outside in and inside out that Frank talked about. And that is where you need to have a detailed materiality analysis, and it should be a dynamic one. And we have identified 17 areas, which is key for our business to manage ESG risk and drive sustainability forward. In the sense, to develop right processes and system is very important also to driving. Right from, see, we do not give any sustainability policy or environmental policy because it is too vague. And that is where we identified those 17 areas, including right from climate change to human rights or indigenous people management to cultural management to sustainable supply chain to governance. So all this, we have given dedicated policy commitment for each of those 17 focus area, because again, that will bring the clarity. What is my commitment to achieve in that area and that aspect of my business? So having said that, next level is to have right KPIs fixed across the organizations and then communicating those properly. So therefore, you have a system to monitor how you are performing on those KPIs. I think Constant talked about that. You should be, or Frank talked about how you should be honest in the disclosing what you achieved and what we could not achieve. And that is only possible when you have robust mechanism to monitor each of the progress what you are achieving. And that is what possibly, now with the advent of digitizations and AIs and, all the systems, it becomes much more easier and transparent what we are monitoring. And that's what we are in JSW implementing, a mechanism to monitor. And then obviously you report based on third-party assurance. So that is all about bringing clarity. And the next challenge is the communicating. And that's, I completely agree with Frank, it's a journey. So you will never stop at one place. It will continue to happen on sustainability journey. Let me give some example how the communicating the opportunity gives the buy-in from everybody and all functions to drive your agenda. See, for example, in steel, we generate a lot of slags, the blast furnace slags, which used to be unutilized. But now we all know that's a good input material for cement. And that is where JSW created a business vertical, that is JSW Cement. The only objective is to manage the slags to make cement. And the result, we have a good thriving cement business, having lowest carbon footprint of all cement companies in the world. And that is only possible by putting circularity into business practices and developing a business practice. Second thing, we know now even climate change is becoming synonymous with sustainability. So whenever you discuss any forum, I see, sorry, Dr. Rajan, people don't talk about diversity where I see a lot of values. People don't talk about, human rights issue that much, where I see a lot of value. But, 70-80% of your conversations, whether it is with investor or with the stakeholder or with the regulator, happens with the climate change. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, we are in a business which is hard to avoid sector and is difficult for the climate change mitigation, as we all know. And that is where what steps I should take that I can communicate to my operation team, which can imbibe. So if I talk, climate change is big threat and it is blah, blah, they're not going to listen. But if we tell them, boss, if you can reduce 5 kg of, say, coke input, you get a better operational efficiency, you get a better profitability, you reduce your import costs. Oh, that is fantastic. So that is where they get, aligned with your vision to drive your climate change commitments. Or as Namita stated, that how do we take my financial team into my strategy and agree with them that no, this is a good for their business or good for raising fund. And that is where we raise sustainability linked bond. And that is where every finance team is clear. So what I'm trying to tell that, so say, for example, if you are looking at, managing your water and you talk to utility team, tell them that how much money you can save if you can reduce your water consumptions. And that is where it becomes easy acceptability across the organizations. And once you have that easy acceptability across the organizations within all your functions, then you can drive much faster, right? And that is where, if you tell me what is biggest challenges I told, it's bringing the clarity of understanding within the organizations right from top to bottom. I see in my personal experience that you might have a easy acceptability from the top in the beginning, but having that across the organization and driving down to the bottom is the real challenge. See, for example, we have a board level sustainability committee which monitor regularly the performance of sustainability performance on every 6 months. But besides that, the executive committee who execute the business decisions, and they meet every month to discuss the profitability, raw material availability, operational challenges, what is the constraint, what is the staple analysis, all they do. But it is important they also discuss ESG. They also discuss these KPIs. And that is what we have institutionalized. And every month, all our business executive committee discuss that. And most importantly, you have to have some kind of drivers within themselves. And that's where I think someone, Dr. Rajan, you might have told about that, integrating performance, ESG performance as part of their payout. Like why I as a person will get motivated to do something on ESG when my KRA is linked to ESG performance, even if I'm in the operations. So that also we have done from right from the board level to the shop floor in charge level, integrating sustainability KPIs with their KRA so that the variable pay is linked now. So that is, you have to use carrot and stick both. And that is how you can bring in that seriousness across the organizations. I'm just giving some of the examples what we are doing. I'll be happy to share more examples if you want. Thanks, Ashok. I'll take a pause here.
Thank you for this insightful information, and it's wonderful actually linking KPIs, sustainability KPIs to the business performance as a key driver is, I think, something fabulous. And over and above that, actually, you have also shown how ESG can drive new businesses, the way you have integrated steel and cement based on the ESG requirements. So I think these are some great examples for Indian organizations to start thinking and positioning themselves. So now from here, moving to Constant. Prabodha gave a perspective from the Indian point of view. Now from WPCSD has been kind of driving various programs that have key components of ESG that can get embedded into organizations. So what I would like to understand from you, Constant, is how best can global organizations integrate ESG considerations into organizational decisions making, and how are you kind of looking at enabling it? And if you could throw some light, that could also be seen as some of the best practices for Indian industries to move forward with.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So you're talking about organization, but organizations are made out of people. So I would say two things people need to change is, well, develop new skills and have a more, change a mindset. So these are the two things that are critical. Why I'm saying this is because you really have two worlds. The financial world, that is the flow and allocation of financial capital, that is very well known and established. And then you have the non-financial system, the ESG system that looks into the natural capital and social capital. And there we have developed tools, natural capital protocol, social capital protocol, and all those tools that are related to the non-financial system that we have talked a lot. So those two worlds, the financial and non-financial system, actually must work together for a shared goal. So when I say change the mindset and develop new skills, it's about the financial people looking into the non-financial system, and the non-financial system people, sustainability people, look at the financial system. And so in between, you have the business decision making and risk assessment. We have done a survey that looked at risk filing from companies, which is more on the financial side, and compared them with the materiality and ESG risks. And we found that 35% of companies have zero alignment between ESG risks and risk filings. So clearly those two worlds, you do not talk to each other. 57% of the company we interviewed have some alignment between ESG risks and financial risk filing at the stock exchange. And only 8% had full alignment between those two risks. So this really shows that you have two types of people that need to talk to each other a lot more. And these are the chief sustainability officer and the chief risk officer. And look at how can we align those, because if each of those people are convinced, or my company is faced with those risks, it's the same risk that the company is faced with. So you need to have some alignment. So the question is, how often do they speak to each other? Is a chief risk officer, regularly speaking to the chief sustainability officer? Other question is, at board level, you have a risk committee. How much of the material or ESG risk are being discussed at board level? And is the board competent to look at sustainability issues in the same way as they are when you look at the traditional risk kind of approach? So we have developed a lot of tools and we have worked with the COSO framework on how to embed ESG risk into the traditional risk management framework. And ESG risks are a bit different than the traditional one. And so you have to look at a more dynamic approach to risk assessment rather than just a simple kind of probability versus severity, the 2x2 metrics, because ESG risks, you are looking at interconnected risks that influence each other. And the combination of those risks may be more important, more severe than the most important risk that you have identified on the normal 2x2 metrics. So the dynamic risk assessment is a new way to look at ESG risks that bring into, if you want, the risk management processes into play. So yes, new skills, new mindset, speak more to each other into those different worlds, look at aligning the risks exchange. And we have developed tools and frameworks and guidelines on all those topics that are can be downloaded from the internet.
Thanks a lot, Constant, for these inputs again. And definitely, I think you bring in a very valuable point of communication internally, and then also the gap that you have elaborated in terms of ESG risks and the risk filing, actually. And that's so true. As such, and that's something companies, if they start working more on and starting to bring the transparency, would help them a lot. So thanks a lot for your inputs. So with this, we are coming to a closure today. I would like to thank each and every panelist. It has been an extremely informative discussion. I learned a lot from what you have shared, and what you have done, the way I look at it, is you have actually demystified ESG today. People say ESG is complicated, it's jargon, zoo or alphabet soup, etc. And that's what it comes out to be, but nicely explained, even like Constant, you spoke, like even though there are so many rating and ranking agencies, it's good, and trying to bring out the advantages of that. And what you have all done today is to kind of tell the organizations as to how, in a simplified manner, you could approach this, being transparent, being natural, trying to use the right tools. Many of the speakers have illustrated and or showcased some of the tools which you could kind of use to help you move forward in this journey. And the keyword here is the journey. Actually, this is a journey which one needs to continue. There would be newer challenges, but a systematic approach would help us meet the target or our ambitions that we are talking about from ESG. And with this, I would like to thank each one of you for bringing in such a valuable information, which was going to help Indian industries and Indian corporations to embed ESG. And I say this is just a start as we go along this journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good day.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ashok, for moderating the dialogue with our subject matter experts today. Clearly, the discussion highlighted challenges, opportunities, and the need for clear roadmap required to drive the way forward. On behalf of ET Energy World and SABIC, I thank our panelists today for sharing their valuable point of view. We hope our viewers found the discussion insightful. Please continue to share your takeaways and highlights from the event on social media using the hashtag Championing India. On that note, I now invite Mr. Janardhanan Ramanujalu, Vice President and Regional Head, South Asia and ANZ SABIC, to share his concluding remarks to mark the closing of this very important topic. Welcome, Mr. Ramanujalu.
Thank you, and hello all to my fellow panelists as well as the audience who have joined virtually from all over. I trust that the session by all the panelists was very insightful and enlightening. It has been, at least to me, to all of you. I would like to probably set the context of the ESG reporting in India. I think we all know governance has been the bedrock of reporting in India for many decades. also because most of it was statutorily required. When their communities got impacted by industrialization, economic development, the social concept came into prominence. And of course, it manifested itself into corporate social responsibility, which was a kind of a standalone activity, and not much of reporting was done, though the work was done. Some of this changed, of course, in 2014 when India mandated corporate social responsibility spending and a fixed amount, and also reporting back to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. The last one part of it, the environmental reporting, I think this is actually now the mainstream activity of all very large corporations and global companies. But this equally applies to all businesses and all industries, and we need to take steps towards the ESG reporting. Let me make myself more clearer. It is not the reporting which is important. Reporting should not be the reason why we do something. We do something because we care for something. Then we need to communicate that. This is the context of the ESG reporting, which I would personally prefer. The increase in awareness about the environmental ESG factors coming quite of late is not only interesting for the investor community's interests, it's all stakeholders, which goes much beyond. It's also not just the shareholders, but also employees, the communities, the regulators, and so on and so forth. As a result, companies are taking multiple steps because there is a rising expectation from all stakeholders about the business strategies, which includes the ESG part of it, to their interest. Coming back to the Indian component part of it, now our Prime Minister took very ambitious steps in COP26 as commitment from India to go carbon neutral by probably 2070. I think the government is leading, and companies cannot remain far behind in achieving those goals. So we have a role to play in those ambitions. Thereby, business strategies need to fall in place towards similar target timelines to make sure that those goals are achieved, not just for India, but by the way, globally. It is not the regulator's job to achieve those goals. It is we who need to deliver those goals. So the regulators set the ambitions for the country. That's being said on the ambition from the Prime Minister. I think the environment part of ESG part of reporting from India, SEBI as an organization has already stipulated that the top 1,000 companies by market capitalization need to put out their ESG reporting in the form of business responsibility and sustainability report. So you have the government's ambitions, you have the regulator stepping up for the first 1,000 companies to start reporting. But I think this applies to all companies and all businesses. There is a general conception that the E component of reporting is mostly towards manufacturing companies, but I would say it is applicable to all industries. And when all industries and all businesses start to incorporate their ESG into their business strategies, then I think this is what I would call future-proofing of the Indian businesses. What's the current context? India has had a very robust, sometimes maybe it was considered a little bit too much of regulation on the governance framework. Like we had extensive, for decades, we had extensive reporting requirements regulated and stipulated by the government. And we are quite strong in that. The next part of it is, of course, as I said earlier, the social commitment started becoming, and India is probably one of the first large economies in the world which has mandated a 2% of the profits to be spent on CSR and report in the director's report annually, not just for the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, but also to the shareholders. The last part of it is still in very nascent stage. The environmental reporting is very nascent stage. About 120, 130 companies are now actually starting to report ESG as part of their annual reports. But then this has to grow in numbers. We have thousands of companies in India. And some sectors are leading it actually already. We can clearly see the transportation, finance, cement, construction. They have started reporting much earlier. And that's the first encouraging sign for the big companies. Are there no challenges for us in this? There are quite some few challenges. Many of our businesses are MSMEs, and MSMEs do not have the bandwidth because usually it is an entrepreneur-based operation to have and cover the ESG requirements. They should not be looked at as a handicap, but here is the space and the opportunity for the ESG practitioners to tailor-make solutions for MSMEs to start reporting their ESG achievements. This is not an extra burden for the MSMEs. It is just a lack of bandwidth, skill, and manpower to make it happen. And I think we have a responsibility to make sure that it is easy enough that they start taking the first steps. For the last part, the environmental concerns are built into our regulatory framework. We know in India, in manufacturing, the environmental factors come under the Ministry of Environment and Forests, where most of it is regulated, and this needs to be adhered, not just to start up a manufacturing industry, but also to stay in business, license to operate. These are the conditions. So I think this is in place. What is not in place is probably the same amount of, let's say, regulation towards other businesses. And I'm not asking for more regulations for other businesses, but they need to step into this ESG component, with E being, also a major component of their concerns, activities, strategies, as well as reporting. The investments in future, of course, will be attracted by companies which have a better ESG framework, better ESG reporting, better ESG achievements, and sectors and companies which do not do well on this will have an impact in how they finance their businesses in future. Companies which have clear strategies on carbon footprint, carbon neutrality, are definitely likely to attract more capital for their growth and operations in future than those who don't do it to the same level and scale. Future-proofing Indian businesses will need all of us to start taking steps. There is no one big step to be taken. Depending on which stage of evolution each company is in, we all need to take a step, big or small. We need to start with a step. I believe India would offer unique solutions, like it does in many other areas, for all developing and underdeveloping countries with its framework of how ESG has to be done from a less developed or underdeveloped economy. Thank you. Thank you very much for your patience, and I hope you have a lot of takeaways from today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Janardhanan, for sharing your thoughts relevant to our audience in India. I'm positive our audience in India will have multiple takeaways from your address. Once again, on behalf of ET Energy World and SABIC, would like to thank all the speakers for gracing our event with your presence today. Your inputs and subject matter knowledge made the purpose of this forum successful. My special thanks to our audience for being here today. Finally, my gratitude to the leadership team at SABIC for organizing this dialogue. Once again, thank you to all of you. Take good care of yourselves and your loved ones. Stay safe and keep the engagements on social media alive by using the hashtag championing India.